or so, we get a new governor in New Mexico. And we've been waiting a really long time, and there are a lot of things that are on the list that we need a new governor and a new and a larger Democratic caucus in the legislature to take on. But I'll tell you, I can't think of another issue more important to New Mexico than addressing our gun violence crisis, addressing crime from a progressive way of doing business that helps people break those cycles of violence, helps people break those cycles of poverty, and puts them to work in our communities to give back to those of us who are already doing that work to expand opportunity for everybody. But some of you know, now, we're here to talk about guns, and we're here to talk about gun violence and how a new governor can really help make that happen. Now, some of you know that earlier this year, I was running for Congress for a while. Now, before I teamed up with Deb Haaland to help her campaign, we made some pretty viral ads to talk about the NRA, to hold them accountable, and started a whole new conversation amongst Democrats around the country about how you can talk about the folks that are in charge in Washington that are standing in the way of progress. But I gotta tell you, some of you don't know the reason I started doing that work. Years ago, I was a young police officer. 20 years ago, I started out, and my very first job as a new police officer back then in Washington, D.C., was at the beginning of every school year. We would go to the elementary and the middle schools, and during that first week, some of our educators are here, during pre-year training, we would spend an afternoon teaching kindergarten teachers how to teach kindergartners to hide under their desk if a bad guy came to their school. As a new cop, I was sure every year that would be the last year we'd have to do this because it was so absolutely ridiculous. 20 years later, those kids that we were teaching to do that in kindergarten are now leading our marches as juniors and seniors in high school for the first time that they get to vote. It matters for a lot of reasons. As a young cop, I was involved in a shooting with a wanted felon with an illegal gun. A bad guy, a felon with a warrant who bought a gun in a fast food parking lot just out across the Washington, D.C. border because he knew that a background check would stop him, but that the loophole was big enough for him to drive his car to Maryland to buy a gun and bring it back. And as a new city councilor, some of you remember one of the very first things I got to do 4 years ago was to name a new city park after Officer Daniel Webster. Some of us remember that Officer Webster was shot at Central in Wyoming by a wanted felon who bought an illegal gun in a Wiener Schnitzer parking lot on Central Avenue because he couldn't buy one legitimately because he had a felony and he was wanted by the police. 20 years after we started working on those issues, nothing has gotten better. And everyone in this room has a personal story because you were in a school, or you have a child, or a sister, or a mom who's been involved in some piece of gun violence somewhere in this country. Now, as a city councilor, we've done a whole lot in Albuquerque to try to take this on. Gun tip hotlines, giving police more tools to go after illegal guns. I went to the White House and represented New Mexico to talk about the things we could do at local levels to get around the challenges in Congress and at the state legislature with folks like Susana Martinez and Paul Ryan in charge who would not let us take action at those levels. We've done what we can do at the city, and we need your help. But I'll tell you, there's nothing we can do to prevent gun violence to take a bigger step in New Mexico than electing a governor who promises to pass common sense gun legislation and free up us to enforce the guns that keep in our hands of people who walk into a school or a city hall or a city park and go after people like us. I can't be more proud to welcome some friends of ours and the people who in just a few days are going to help us do that. But I got to tell you, you've seen the polls. Every time a new poll comes out, it gets closer and closer, right? Democrats have got to have a reason to turn out. Republicans are fired up for all kinds of reasons. And one of the things that we just saw on the news, the NRA just launched $1 million national PR campaign to help Donald Trump's new Supreme Court justice get into office purely because they want to make guns more available to people who shouldn't have them. Because when gun companies are in charge, they're trying to sell more guns. And the way we stand up to the federal government is by having smart state laws. Now, I got to tell you, there are a few people I've worked with over the years with the legislature, from HB 77 to 44 to 50, and all those years we've been fighting for gun violence prevention, and none have been better champions than the folks that we're going to talk to here. But first, I want to welcome the man who's going to be our next lieutenant governor, one of my favorite state senators who's going to champion on this with us, who understands common sense, who's an educator who's keeping our schools safe. Help me welcome our next lieutenant governor, Howie Morales.
Good morning. It's so wonderful to be back up here. You know, we've gone over anywhere where Michelle or myself have gone all over the state of New Mexico. There's an energy that's being created and that's brewing because New Mexicans are hungry for change. And we see that here today. I was in Hobbs last night and the energy that's there. And considerably what's considered a red county, you wouldn't know that by the amount of support that we have down there ensuring that we can get our message out. And I'm proud to be here today. I'm proud to be with each one of you as we pass forward legislation that's going to help us in the state of New Mexico. It's not only about creating a safer New Mexico. This goes far beyond that. This is an attempt and an opportunity for us to attack the crime epidemic that we've seen in the state and we've seen right here in Albuquerque. This is an opportunity for us here in the state of New Mexico to rebuild a broken health system that was dismantled unnecessarily. And this is an opportunity which is really near and dear to my heart, simply because I was an educator. And I know what it means to walk into those school settings, and you want to ensure that you're safe. You want to ensure that you're going to have protections in place that's going to allow you to do your job and connect with those students. And even more so, why it's so important to me is because I'm a parent. 6-year-old son, 10-year-old daughter who will start school tomorrow. We want to ensure that for those children and all children across the state of New Mexico, that we can do all we can to protect them, to make sure that we have the courage to stand forward and to say, we're going to be a leader in this country right here in the state of New Mexico, and we can get that done. And when we talk about courage, the person I'm going to introduce right now is an example of what that courage is like. An individual who's been part of one of those disasters that have taken place. She was in Las Vegas when the shootings had taken place right there. She experienced firsthand what it was to be in that moment and that terror. But she chooses not to sit back and just become a victim, but rather moving forward to have courage to tell us her story and motivate us and inspire us that we can make change. And when she was back there and we spoke, she says, I'm a little nervous, I've never done this before. I shared with her, speak from the heart. Because that's what it's going to take to make sure we can connect with New Mexicans all across the state. And it's my honor today to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Miranda Lovato.
Okay, put together a little something for you guys. So, nothing can prepare you for gun violence. Nothing can prepare you for running for your life. Nothing can prepare you for the aftermath. My name is Miranda Lovato, born and raised in New Mexico. I grew up in Taylor Ranch, attended Volcano Vista High School, and recently graduated from New Mexico State University. Flash forward to last October, my best friend and I attended the Route 91 Harvest Fest in Las Vegas, Nevada. We'd been there all weekend, having fun, having the time of our lives, shopping, hanging by the pool, enjoying adult beverages. All weekend, we saw our favorite country singers like Eric Church, Sam Hunt, and on Sunday, we had just started watching Jason Aldean when the shooting began. The next 11 minutes forever changed the course of my life. The hour after the shooting started, my best friend and I ran for our lives. We hid under a pop-up bar and really anything we could find. We jumped fence after fence and ran until we could find somewhere safe to hide, which ended up being a Motel 6 about 2 miles away. Never would I have imagined having to send a goodbye text to my family or accept the fact that I may never make it back home. Since then, the shooting has affected me every single day. I can no longer enjoy my usual outings, like going to church, going out with friends, and even simple acts as going to the grocery store. Shootings have happened at churches. Shootings have happened at nightclubs. and even a small crowd at the grocery store frightens me. I thank God I survived the shooting, but now I have to learn to live as a survivor of gun violence. The panic attacks, hypervigilance, anxiety, and nightmares are just some of the things that gun violence does to those of us that are lucky enough to survive. Lucky to be alive is an understatement. 58 innocent lives were taken that night, and over 500 people were injured. Something needs to change. Unless we have gun reform in our country, there is no plan to escape. Gun violence does not discriminate, does not see race, does not see your socioeconomic class. It does not care about who you know. It can happen at any moment to any person. That's why I'm proud to stand here with Congresswoman Lujan Grisham, Gabby Giffords, and Captain Kelly. 3 people who are relentlessly fighting for our safety. They're not only fighting for our community, but for the future of our children. Now I'm very honored to introduce our next governor, Lujan Grisham, Gabby Giffords, and Captain Kelly.
Of course, they're going to Does it really make that big a difference? Did it? All right, I got some thumbs up in the very back. Thank you all for being here. I know it's crowded, and it's a bit uncomfortable, and it's too warm, but this is what fighting for the things that will make a difference in all of our lives looks like. Right, where we are all together, we will do everything that it takes, and following the courage of a young woman like Miranda, these are the proudest moments for me, both in being the Congresswoman for this incredible community and district and state, and for being a candidate for a state I love and I believe in. And even though for each one of you that is true, New Mexico does not have the kind of gun violence reforms and safety initiatives that we need at all places in government. City councils, county governments, state governments, and I can tell you this, as a member of Congress, Congress is not gonna do it, not now. That's why Gabby Giffords and Captain Kelly, who I will introduce in a minute, fight tirelessly every single minute of every single day. They come into each of our communities because they're fighting for your safety, right? They're fighting so that each of our children and my grandchildren can have the constitutional right that they deserve to be safe in their schools and in their neighborhoods and in their communities. And in fact, what they're going to tell you is information you already know, that New Mexico is an F-rated state when it comes to sensible gun safety reforms. It's an F when it comes to gun violence statistics. 2 things that we together can change immediately. And we're going to do that when I'm governor. And one of the things that we're going to do that's going to change the course of this country and states can band together is we're going to study gun violence as the public health epidemic that it is. Not going to direct, Howie and I are going to direct the Department of Health to initiate that work immediately, and we're going to start providing information to the legislature in the 2019 legislative session to the highest degree that we can, because we will have just been starting, but we're going to keep doing that. And I know that Commissioner Maggie Hart-Stebbins is somewhere here, and she wanted me to, I see pointing, they're working on gun violence, gun safety reforms in a resolution that I don't know exactly what it will encapsulate, but we know it will at least do criminal background checks, risk protection orders, making sure that domestic violence abusers do not have access to firearms, that we begin to limit the access to firearms like assault weapons and high magazine magazine cartridges. These are only weapons that are used to kill another human being and have nothing to do with sports and public safety or personal safety. We need to take a stand, and we are. All right. I want to end with two things. How many of you, we heard Miranda's story, how many of you have been touched personally by gun violence? Raise your hands. I would submit that this is far too many. There were 400 deaths due to gun violence in New Mexico. My grandson, who's 18, is fine, physically fine, but was held at gunpoint for a carjacking with 2 other young men, and that could have gone terribly wrong. And the fact that I'm now up at night worrying about my grandson, and so is my daughter, and so is every person who raised their hand who worries about their neighbors and their families. Enough is enough. And it is time that we take back our communities and we demand that we are safe in our state, right? All right. I want to introduce 2 folks who unwavering have put their own lives on hold while they make a difference in a country that has failed to act, certainly in the face of Congressman Giffords and her incredible husband, who I'm going to introduce first, Captain Kelly. He'll come to the stage first. In light of their courage, advocacy, and their efforts, it is still shameful that the Republicans in Congress, including my opponent, who have A ratings from the NRA, are refusing to do one thing, including protect us on airplanes and making sure that the basics, like a criminal background check, right, and that we can do robust, violent studies about the gun violence epidemic in the state. They won't do one single thing to address your constitutional right and mine to be safe in our communities. And I know unequivocally that that's going to change in 2 ways. States, we are going to lead with them, and they're going to take this fight community to community, state to state. We're going to work as a block until we do not leave Congress any other choice but to address a problem that only this nation has. Yes. Right? Only this nation has this problem. So with that, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce an incredible advocate, a champion, an expert, Captain Kelly, to the stage.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And hello, everybody. A little hot in here. You know, if this was in Tucson, it would be a little hotter. But I want to thank Miranda for telling her story. I know that's not easy. You did a fantastic job. This is one of our favorite places. You probably don't know this. I know if Gabby was ever to leave Arizona, there is one place else that she would want to live, and that's in Santa Fe. She's a big fan of your capital, and so she's happy to be here. We're going to go up there today. We've got a little bit of work, but first I want to tell you a little story. So yesterday, Gabby and I flew in here from Tucson, and we went over to the university, and we met with a group of young people, high school students. Well, I think one might have been in elementary school, but they were high school kids or just out of high school. There were like 9 or 10 of them. And I sat down. They had just testified in front of, I think it might have been the Senate, something like a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing called something else. So they testified. It was the end of a long day. And I sat down to talk to them, Gabby and I did, and I asked them a few questions. And one question that I often ask people, groups, people like you, is how many people in here know somebody who was shot? And usually I get an answer of around 50% in almost anywhere you go in the United States, which if you go to any other developed country, because I've asked the same question in Australia and the UK before, nobody raises their hand. 0%. But in the US, it's generally 50%. When I did that yesterday with these kids between the age of like 16 and 19, you know how many of them raised their hand? Everyone. I was shocked. Everyone. And it's a problem that other developed countries don't have to deal with. It's a complicated problem. We're working on fixing this. But the sad thing about this is we know it works. We know in states that have the strongest gun laws have the least amount of gun violence. Right now, that state happens to be Massachusetts. Massachusetts has about 4 people per 100,000 per year die from a gunshot wound. You know what it is in your state? It's 18.3, significantly higher, and that's because the gun laws are weaker here. Now, we have tried to improve these gun laws on the state level and in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is kind of complicated. You're going to get a new governor, hopefully. Hopefully that new governor is standing in this room. We're pretty sure that's the case. But at the same time, Deb Haaland needs to, she needs to be the next member of Congress. Because we need champions on this issue. We need people, both in the State House here and in Washington, D.C., who will stand up to the powerful corporate gun lobby and pass reasonable legislation that someday, what we hope is when Gabby and I come back here 10 years, well, we'll be here a lot more before then, but like 10 years from now, when I ask that question again, instead of 9 or 10 hands going up, no hands go up. That's the goal. Michelle, as a member of Congress, supported these reforms, background checks for gun sales, domestic violence legislation, keeping guns out of the hands of terrorists, some very common sense things. She did that in the House. Her opponent here, Steve Pierce, I know I'm not supposed to say his name, but I'm going to say it anyway. Her opponent, A rating from the NRA, stands firmly against any common sense reforms that'll keep your community safer here in Washington, D.C. You certainly do not want him to be the governor. He will be a rubber stamp for the gun lobby, just like your current governor is, who, by the way, vetoed a pretty strong bill that would protect women from domestic violence. This issue, this is pretty interesting. People don't realize this. This issue is a lot different for men than it is for women. Men are usually shot by people they don't know, strangers. And women are usually shot by people they do know. So strong domestic violence legislation is so important to keep women safe from gun violence. And your next governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, is certainly going to be a champion for that legislation. We're going to work, hopefully we will continue to work here in New Mexico to get this legislation passed. It has to happen, and if it's just necessary. It's not a question. She's going to be elected, but to do that, there are some things that all of you have to do. You are obviously enthusiastic about politics and having a new governor. You're here today. You're going to vote. But we got to get other people out to vote. We got to get young people out to vote. We're seeing a surge of leadership among young people on this issue of gun violence, not only, from Parkland, Florida, but here in New Mexico as well. But please encourage your friends and neighbors to show up on election day to vote for Michelle Lujan Grisham. It is so important. These races can, as we know, it can come down to a single vote. There's a House race in Ohio right now. It's too close to call, and this is going to be tight. To get elected, you need the resources to run a great campaign, and you need people to show up to vote. I know you're working hard. Please continue to do that. Now I want to introduce you to a woman who makes me get out here every day to do this kind of stuff. She's the politician in the family. I used to just fly things, airplanes, spaceships for a living. Gabby doesn't allow me to do that anymore. Now she makes me to stand in hot rooms like this, talk to great people like you. Let me tell you a little bit about Gabby. Most positive person I've ever met. She's been a public servant, from early in her 20s. She really cares about people. their lives and these issues. This is an issue that obviously affected her when she was shot in 2011, but we were motivated to do this in 2012 when 20 kindergartners and first graders were killed in their classrooms, and a gun lobby that put out a message that was obviously not the answer. I know you didn't want to hear from me at all, so I'm going to introduce you to the person that you did want to hear from, my incredible wife, former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords.
These are scary times. Racism, sexism, lies, violence. It's time to stand up for what's right. It's time for courage. We must do something. We must stop gun violence. Protect our children, our future. Let them lead the way. Make our country a safer place, a better place. Do you have the courage to fight? Yes. Stand with me. Vote, vote, vote. On election day, your voice matters. Please join your voice with mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Mark, thank you for taking such good care of your wife.
You're welcome. She takes care of me too.